a call from Rex, pronouns he, him, from Illinois. He's pagan. He asks, was the development of homosexuality in early creatures related to population pressure? And I'm really eager to find out what population pressure, what lifting population pressure is doing there. So Rex, welcome to Skep Talk. Hope you can hear us. Tell us a little bit more about your question.
Salutations, Mrs. Gibbon and Mr. Valkai. Nice to see your play button looking very shiny behind you there, Erica. And glad that you made a safe journey back from the Galapagos. But in the vein of questioning everything, how do we know you're not a sea lion wearing a latex mask that is trying to push the woke sea lion agenda?
I guess you can't now.
Yeah. I think the biggest issue is that, right? She's pushing things like LGBT rights and not things like more fish, please. And that's the difference in agenda. You know what I mean?
That makes perfect sense.
It's not that sea lions are anti-LGBT. They just already have that shit figured out. That's not their priority. You know what I mean? But the fish thing, they need more fish.
Absolutely.
Pinnipeds can be pretty gay, if memory serves. So,
oh yeah, just
saying. That's a perfect kind of segue into this question, Rex, isn't it? Tell us a little bit more about what you're thinking here.
It is
I have been waiting a long time for you
how it actually is a perfect segue into this.
No, you couldn't have concocted a better one, you know, with an infinite amount of time. So
pinnipeds are pretty gay, anyway. Go on.
Because I wanted to ask a biologist and a primatologist about it. When I was in the Navy, doing this quickly. When I was in the Navy, when you're underway for a long period of time, you run out of normal conversations. And back in the 80s, we didn't have the internet to bring in more information. So we would talk about homosexuality and how it developed. And I and some of my other shipmates were of the mind that homosexuality in species evolved from population pressure, where the population would get too high for the available resources. And so since a pregnant female can control their hormones no more than I can control how my kidneys are filtering out fluids, maybe it was a development that if there were some members that could contribute to the security and development of the tribe without adding to the population pressures, that was an advantage, and that's where that came from. Am I way off base, or am I somewhere in the ballpark?
Gosh, there's a lot of places to go with that. First, do you mind if I start?
I've got a few things. Please, by all means, I've got some notes for later.
Yeah, perfect. So I think you're in the ballpark. There are a lot of hypotheses out there for homosexuality in general, like across mammals, in other species. And my personal opinion is that it's probably convergent in a lot of different lineages, but within mammals and within social species in particular, I think that you're not that far off base with this idea that if you've got like a homosexual couple, they're able to effectively increase the fitness of their group's offspring. Right? Like you don't have to directly reproduce in order to increase your sort of siblings' fitness and in a way specific genes of your own's fitness. So there's a hypothesis out there that is kind of interesting, specifically that women who have like gay brothers actually have a higher fitness than women who don't. And the idea essentially comes from A, you have the social aid in like child rearing, right? But B, it's also a signal to other females that, you know, you in and of yourself are like a fit individual and that you have a social system that can help take care of potential offspring. And they did this interesting study on this where they looked at the fitness of women who had like gay brothers. And according to this study, you can take it how you will, their individual fitness was higher than their conspecifics who didn't have gay brothers. And that in and of itself kind of increases the fitness of the brother, right? Because they share a lot of genes in between the two of them. So in that way, the gay brother, even though he's not biologically reproducing himself, he is pushing and ensuring the proliferation of some of his genes through his sister. So if you want to take like a selfish gene perspective, that might be the reason why these kinds of things can persist. I think the real reason, at least in primates, and I'm going to speak from a primate-centric perspective here, is a lot simpler. I think that primates are horny, and I think that they don't really care a lot about sort of which sex they're getting it from, right? Like, a lot of primates exhibit bisexuality, and will just kind of have sex whenever they want with whoever they want, even if it is typically heterosexual. A lot of them will behave in homosexual ways. Macaca fuscata and the bonobos, of course, come to mind. And in those two species in particular, homosexual sex plays a very particular role, and that's that it increases social cohesion, right? It chills everybody out. Bonobos classically are a hypersexual sister group to chimpanzees. They're matriarchal. They fight less intensely than their chimpanzee companions, even if they do fight as frequently. They don't want to kill each other as much. A lot of spats as compared to, like, genuine war and bloodlust that you tend to see in common chimps and their, related subspecies. But Frans de Waal used to say that you could throw a cardboard box into an enclosure of bonobos and they would all have sex prior to investigating the box, because they just get so excited that it's like, they've got to put this energy somewhere. And so they just copulate. And then they're like, okay, now that we're all satisfied, we'll investigate the box. So in both of those sort of avenues, you have, one, a reason why homosexuality exists kind of in the first place, which is that it increases social cohesion in social mammals. And then secondarily, you have a reason why it persists, genetically speaking, which is that individuals who are capable of increasing the fitness of their siblings see their genes sort of live on through them. The second one I don't buy as much as I buy the first one. I think social cohesion is enough, if I'm being quite honest. And I think that very few primates in general are going to be like strictly heterosexual. So I think that that's a lot of the time where we get homosexual behavior. It's just a natural part of human variation, and it's good when everybody's feeling satiated. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think Erica touched on a lot there that's really good. And like the first thing you brought up is either exactly or very similar, very, very close to what I've always heard is the gay uncle hypothesis, that you have this extra guy around who can help take care of kids, who can help fight off predators, that can help protect and keep the group together, that can help with social cohesion. That also isn't a competition or mate selection. That's just like the dark matter of the galaxy holding things together without actually, having to be a problem. And there's also some really cool ideas about homosexuality, not specifically homosexuality, but non-specific sexuality. Just having sex to do it, and you're not actually deliberately going across sexual lines for it, being an ancestral state. That deliberate heterosexual behavior is actually the new aberrant weird thing that is more productive sometimes in a sexually reproducing species. But the fact that we've seen homosexual behavior in over 1,500 animal species, the fact that we see stochastic sexual behavior in a lot of species as well, things that do like broadcast spawning and whatnot, pretty hard to call that heterosexual when you're literally spewing your jizz all over the entire population. And that kind of thing being the ancestral state, and only later on did things start trying to be sometimes deliberately heterosexual. That's a lot more of a parsimonious model than saying that homosexuality is this strange aberration beyond the norm that just happens to show up all the fucking time. And so there's that as well. As for me, I think I know you aren't arguing for this, but I think it's always funny to look at when we talk about sexuality as if it's this deliberate action, as if it's a choice or something like that. I think the greatest argument against sexuality being a choice is straight women, because nobody would choose this if they didn't have to. And that to me tells us a lot about evolution. Anyway, I could go on, but I feel like we've been talking to you for a little while. What do you think about the things we've said?
I believe that you guys have just hit it on the nail. I absolutely appreciate that. There's a machinist mate chief petty officer that I can now tell that I'm right and he's wrong. And since you do have so many callers and you want to get some more in, I will let you two go. here's looking forward to the day when I can call in to Dr. Gibbon and perhaps even Dr. Valkai at some point. And if you two would do me a great favor and let Jimmy know that with great respect, he can go fuck himself, I would appreciate it. You, everybody there, have a wonderful day.
We can pass that information on for sure. Thank you, Rex.
For sure.
Yeah, gosh, there's a lot of really interesting hypotheses. Like, and I've not focused, I hadn't even considered like broadcast spawning, like considering like fish and like, you know, arthropods and things of that nature. Like I'm so like monkey brained that I focus so specifically on like primates and then sometimes other social mammals, like if I feel like dipping my toe in. But it's like, gosh, we see so many different types of relationships in some of our closest relatives. And one of my favorites that I like to bring up too when people talk about sexuality is that it's like, so there's this really interesting thing where in a lot of baboons, because they're matrilineal, females are the ones that stick around in their natal group and males are the ones that get booted. So it's like a male grows up, he reaches sexual maturity, and then the males who are already resident in the group are like, get out, get the hell out. Like, we don't want to see you. We don't want to see your face around here. Leave. So he leaves and he has to find his way into a new troop. So his best in to get accepted into a new troop is to befriend a local female. And so he schmoozes this local female, and the female, the hypothesis for a long time was that it's like, the brilliant primatologists were thinking to themselves, clearly all dudes, of course. The reason why is because he's schmoozing to her so he can get into this troop, and then also they're gonna reproduce later. He's got a friend that he can easily go and reproduce with. Oh, that makes sense, except for the fact that that doesn't always happen. In fact, a lot of the time they just stay pals. They're just buddies, and like that male will protect that female's offspring from other, you know, potentially infanticidal males. But then he's just like big chilling. Like he's just fine being pals with her or whatever. They don't necessarily have to reproduce. It's like males and females have all sorts of different complicated relationships, just like females and males and in non-human species. And so it's like, I don't see why that doesn't seem to compute when we're talking about things like homosexuality. Like sometimes, especially in bonobos, they're just horny. It's that simple. Yeah. Like, they're just like, we're both psyched up. Like, I guess it's time to, you know, let's de-stress here for a minute. And it's like, we don't feel the need to assign a label necessarily to individual bonobos because they're all just, it's a free-for-all. And the same is true for a lot of different primates.
Fellas, is it gay to de-stress a bro? You know what I mean? And like that, the whole thing, it really... what I think is really interesting to think about, and of course, you know, this is coming from me, the super woke leftist scientist and all this shit. But like, you know, we're going to get comments about it. But like, I think it's really interesting to point out the fact that like what we are doing is we are applying our concepts of sexuality as like a concept in Western thought, and the fact that we look at homosexual behavior or bisexual behavior, the fact that we are applying those labels in the first place, rather than just saying they're just having sex, and sometimes they do it in a way that can have children, sometimes they don't. And we see all sorts of different sexual behaviors. We see anal sex, we see oral sex, we see non-procreative genital stimulation, aka masturbation, or even mutual masturbation. We see all these different things in nature, and we don't feel need.
They fence with their penises. The bonobos do. I mean, that's innovative. Truly,
we could solve a lot of problems. Bring that shit to Congress. We see a lot of very, for lack of a better word, very human sexual behaviors across taxa. And it's just when we happen to see it being homosexuality that we're like, oh, that's weird. We should talk about that. We should discuss this. Rather than they don't have that concept to worry about. You know, they don't have that if we're being honest, Eurocentric and concept that they're applying this weird moral framework into a scientific one. And this outdated morality becoming a labeling system in science. And I think that kind of thinking hinders both social and scientific progress. And I'm really happy to see that kind of being done away with a little bit nowadays as we talk about sexuality and sex in nature. But we still see the remnants of that, especially looking through, you know, conversations like this one. I think it's interesting, and I'm really glad that guy called. But the fact that it was interesting enough to talk about kind of shows where our biases lie as a culture looking at other species, if that makes any sense.
No, for sure. I mean, I saw a talk at the AABAs this year, like this past March, and my dog is going to start barking in a second. I'm going to have to yell. But it was a talk about reporting of homosexuality, as a meta study on the reporting of homosexuality in primates specifically. And what they found was an enormous bias against the reporting of homosexual behavior in primates, not because they weren't writing it down, but because they were writing it down being like, all right, like it's an aberrant sexual behavior. And then it's just like kind of a part of the notes section, right? It's not reported. And so it's not published. And so it's not jotted down in like the, okay, like, sometimes, Papua Nubis can be gay or whatever. Like it just ends up being lost to the dustbin of that, field season or whatever. And like lions don't have to worry about the sort of masculine culture where it's like, if lions start doing gay stuff, the other lions aren't going to pick on them for it, right? they're just like, these two lions are doing gay stuff, right? Or like American bison, another classic example. It's like, they're not going to, socially, this isn't seen as aberrant for them. It's just, they're blowing off steam, if you will. And in humans, I want to touch on this too, because I know the hater, exactly. The haters out there will say, well, what about pair bonding? Like, why do we see heterosexual pair bonding so frequently? And, what I'll say is that it's like, well, procreative sex is obviously a pretty, cornerstone part of like reproducing for your group. And it's pretty easy to form emotional relationships with people you have sex with. I think people across the world know this. It's a pretty common, hopefully I don't have to explain that to all those virgins out there, not getting any, but it's kind of like a natural step. People watching the show, exactly. Clearly, everybody who's watching the show is getting plenty. I don't have to worry about them. But it's like we see this pair bonding as like a natural step along that path, and we do see pair bonding between same-sex individuals in many species across the board as well. And so it's like I don't see. I do see why this concept and this appreciation for this type of data has taken so long to reach the forefront. But it's like, honestly, I want it to be not a big deal. Like you're right. The fact that we have this conversation is troublesome because it's just like, dude, it's just not. It's not that serious. Like I'm really sorry. It's like social animals have sex. Like they do it, and social animals also form meaningful pair bonded relationships that last a super long time. Like those two things don't have to clash. And then also there's an additional layer on top of that where it's like, clearly the pair bonded nature is an emotional one because we see pair bonded organisms cheat like crazy too. So it's like, there are all of these different layers of relationships in social organisms, whether we're talking about sex, whether we're talking about, like, for lack of a better term, personality, like how they get along with one another. How do they defend a territory? How do they raise their young, right? And then there's the relationships between that couple and those individuals and their immediate surrounding family. It's like, it's complicated, but it's cool.
Yeah, so, I love I do love whenever we see sexual behavior and we're trying to quantify it and categorize it and all these things. There's also this desire, even with heterosexual sex, there's always this very utilitarian way that we go about it, because especially, especially from an evolutionary standpoint, we want to find the reason for everything. Why are you doing that thing? And I remember that was a big thing during, when I was doing anthropology, like there was this kind of like shocking revelation that sometimes people just do stuff for fun. And like, and see, when you're doing archaeology and you're digging up and you're like, what was going on here? Why was this pot broken? What does this pictograph mean? What is this thing? It's like somebody was fucking bored, and it was maybe a kid was fucking around and being stupid. And like, I think about that a lot when I look at like the way that we talk about sexual behavior in the literature and the way that we talk about it in like academia in general, when we're trying to like parse these things out. And it gets it even when we're willing to throw off the shackles of that Eurocentric thinking and think like, okay, well, this is just the way it is. But like, surely, there's pair bonding and there's social cohesion and there's this and this. Also, it feels good, And there's that old, I think it was Robert Sapolsky told this thing in a lecture he was doing where he's like, the Martians come to Earth and all the Martian scientists and the human scientists are sharing details about their species and talking to each other and everything. And they finally get to the concepts of reproduction. And the Martian's like, okay, we're going to show you how we reproduce. And two Martians come next to each other and they rub their ears together. And one sits on the other one's shoulders and they vibrate. And there's some steam that's produced. And then whoop, here pops out another Martian. And they're like, okay, now you show us. And like, okay, and a male and a female human go out together and they all have sex. And then they walk out. And the Martian scientists are like, where's the new human? What happened? Like, what's going to, and they say, well, that's going to happen in 9 months. So we'll get a new human in 9 months. And they say, well, then why were they in such a hurry? And it's like, well, yeah, it's not, there's a reason. It's because it was just fun to do. They were enjoying it. And like that story, to think about it, it's just they were having fun. And I look out in nature and I'm like, okay, I'm seeing two hedgehogs going at it, two female hedgehogs. And I'm like, okay, they're having fun. Do I need to dig into this further than that? Do I need to find a social utility? Do I need to find an adaptive thing? Or can things with brains enjoy stimulating those brains in all sorts of ways, No.
What you say is so true. And you see it outside of the discussion about like sexual behavior as well. Like, it's like I see so much brutalistic language to describe like, oh, the chimpanzee makes forward reverse chuffing sounds when, stimulated by a friend or conspecific or whatever. It's like, no, it's laughing. I know what you want to call it. And I know you don't want to risk the anthropomorphization. And there is the risk of anthropomorphization, for sure. That's a risk that exists. But at the same time, we are also apes. We are also social mammals. So it's like, how do you draw the line between it's like, okay, we're imposing what we do on them versus we do the thing that they've been also doing for tens of millions of years. Can we just call a spade sometimes? Like, can we just say, okay, they're laughing or they're playing pranks or, they're politicking or they're having sex for fun, right? Like, this is just something that's a part of being a social animal, which we are. We need to take a step off the pedestal every now and again and like own that, I think. So I agree. I wonder
if there's room for that in the future of literature to like just have that as an alternative hypothesis that's like, even if that isn't the way that we want to go all the time, at least just having it as a footnote, as a thing. It's just like, it could be this and it could have all these reasons, or also maybe they just did it to do it. And like, whether you have the difference in the paper, either they're blowing off steam or they're just blowing off Steve, and it could be either one. And here's the evidence for both. And like, it's whatevs. And then here's the data that I've collected and here's why it matters to me. And like, just treat it like any other scientific paper where you just include that in the discussion of like, here's what this could be. You know what I mean?
There's such a good paper that I want to recommend everybody who's listening, who's like, oh, I want to learn more about this. It's reassessing the adaptionist paradigm. And I believe it's published in the JHE, but it's about how we do exactly this. Like, we try to find purpose for absolutely everything that humans do, when sometimes the purpose is we're goofy little guys. Sometimes we do stuff that's weird, and sometimes we do it because we enjoy it, and sometimes we do it because we're mad and we want to blow off, steam, or sometimes we want to blow off Steve, like Forrest said, right? Like, it's like there's a million different reasons why individuals do things, and what evolutionary biology's job is to try to identify trends in populations. And I think that we sometimes do so at our peril, and I think Forrest would agree with that. Like, I think we need to be a little bit careful, and sometimes it's okay to say it might be A, it might be B. We're going to operate under that it's A, but it's always the possibility that this is not adaptionist and that the critters are just being critters, which is cool.
I'm looking up, there's a really good paper, and I'm trying to find a free version of it. It's Monk et al. 2019. I have it on my phone because I just texted it to a friend a little bit ago. Here it is. I got a good link for it. This is an alternative hypothesis for the evolution of same-sex sexual behavior in animals. Monk et al. From 2019. I'm putting in the chat right now. And this was one of my favorites, published in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution. And it's talking about what I mentioned during the call about like how this is the ancestral state, non-specific, non-discriminatory sexual behavior. And their last line in their concluding remarks, their whole concluding remarks is only 2 paragraphs long, but the last couple of lines, like, they go fucking hard on like the fact that we are treating this as a weird thing and that we're spending so much time on this. It just shows where our biases are, and it's not good science, and it's just heteronormative. it's heteronormative Eurocentric bullshit, like leading us down a dark path of ignorance. And it hinders social progress and scientific progress. And I love what they say in that paper. So check that out, everybody, if you want to read a really cool thing.
Do it.
Thank you for watching that clip. If you enjoyed it, perhaps you should join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
Join us.
At patreon.com/calltheline.